Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. It is Wednesday, January 26th. I've got Megan here with me and June is here and you're all here. Boy, it's exciting stuff. We are now at about 26 days to the February bar exam. I'm sure somebody out there could probably tell us exactly. And I know that there's a lot going on. We have a few questions today, not a lot, right, Megan? It's pretty quiet today for study questions.
Yeah, comparatively, I think just a few of those things to get through. So then we'll get to spend a good amount of time in our specific subject matter discussion, which is going to be fun. I really enjoyed these.
Yeah, it's we're going to do strict product liability, and we got a lot of feedback. People really seem to enjoy these teaching sessions that we do. And one of the pieces of feedback we got, we've been using mind maps, and a lot of people wanted to know more about the mind mapping process. So I'm actually going to break down the mind map and make it actually step-by-step process to show you today, along with some substance, of course. And I think we got 2 or 3 questions in strict product liability to have everybody practice on. So we're going to show that all to you. We'll do that later in the hour. Megan, let me turn it over to you. What do we got going on in the world today?
Yeah, so all's quiet in terms of bar changes, which was what we were anticipating, that even though the NCBE did make the announcement that if the state no longer allowed people to gather for a large in-person bar exam, that then there would be a March makeup date that would be in person. We have seen 0 states jump on that. So basically, I don't anticipate, now that we are less than 30 days from the bar exam and cases, most places seem to be leveling off a bit, although I guess I should never, you can always speak too soon when it comes to COVID. I'm not seeing any changes happening. I know for some people, they were really hoping that they would get the word that their state was going to go. People were hoping it would be online. That's only Nevada. No other state has shown any indication of switching to online because, of course, they wouldn't be able to do the MBE or to use the UBE test if they did that. I know some people have been waiting and trying to see, are they going to get a reprieve, even a short month-long one? It looks like the answer is no. So definitely be prepared for an in-person exam at the end of February. And make sure you're checking with your jurisdiction to find out what the requirements are, because of course those have changed a bit in this COVID world, with things like, are you going to get the booklet? Even if you're in person, I'm hearing a lot of jurisdictions are not going to give examinees the booklet anymore of all the questions. So in terms of how you're doing your note taking, even though you're in person, you may still be typing directly onto your screen, or highlighting things like that on the screen rather than in front of you. So please be aware of whatever your jurisdiction's rules are.
Yeah, that point, I think, I'm going to have to go back and check, but I believe in the course platform as optional lessons, we've got some instructions for how to do performance tests and essays in an online only format, in terms of just how to prepare on screen and do that work in the electronic documents. So we'll check that out. I'm pretty sure we've got those video lessons that we did in, I guess it was 2020, wasn't it? When all of this started to change. Okay, so that's where we stand there.
All right. And the last thing, Jackson, that I think you want to talk about is the Abundance for Bar Study Masterclass.
I've had the opportunity to work with Paul Sheely at Learning Strategies for many years. And I guess maybe a year ago or so, he invited me to try and take his masterwork, which was called Abundance for Life, and see if I could modify it for the bar exam. And I did. It took a long time. We did a lot of work. We put together a 90-minute on-demand webinar that many of you have been through. And I've never gotten as much positive reaction to anything we've done as we've gotten to this masterclass. It is really about setting your mind for study and performance and abundance. It's got different modules and the ability to go in and do different techniques and practice, and extremely user-friendly and something you can take advantage of right away. Now, this is a product that not only you can watch on demand, there's a second version of it that's time-stamped, so you can find the specific technique and practice that you want to follow. There's a workbook that comes with it, and there's a private community group made up just of people that have been through the masterclass where we can discuss the concepts that are there. I think at this point, with about a month to go to the bar exam, is an optimal time to go through the masterclass. If you've been in the masterclass before, you still have access to it, and I would invite you and encourage you to go through and do it again. Oftentimes when people have done that, they come back and go, wow, there are things I'd forgotten about or I'm not taking full advantage of, and what a big difference it would make. I absolutely believe that it's life-changing. I would encourage you to check that out. And I was saying to Megan and June before we came on today that Paul has actually contacted me recently. He's very interested in what we do at Celebration Bar Review because it's really very different than what Learning Strategies does. They don't work with any other bar reviews. And so he's fascinated with what our curriculum is and how we've integrated photo reading and paraliminals and the abundance study. And he and I are continuing to talk about ways that we can improve your learning and we can bring your natural brilliance to the fore. So I just want to share with you, that's an ongoing practice and feature and something that I'm very pleased and excited about because we can bring his genius to you through these different course products. So
wonderful. All right, just a couple of administrative questions that we'll go through pretty quickly. The first person said they purchased bar maps, but they were wondering if they have to create their own interactive bar maps from what's provided, or is there somewhere to download your more in-depth bar maps?
Yeah. The answer to this question is you could do either way. If you're in bar maps, there is the opportunity to download within the bar maps product. There's a PDF that we've put in for every mind map. That PDF, if you download it and go to page 2, will have all the links in it. And when you open those links, it will open the mind map in MindMeister, which is the program that we use. Now, if you have a paid subscription to MindMeister, which is not terribly expensive, you can then modify and amend that mind map and create a copy for yourself. If you have a free version of MindMeister, you have a limit on the number of mind maps you can open, and I don't think you can edit them. So to my mind, it's worth the $50 or so to get the subscription there. Another alternative is you can download it, print it out, and just use it on paper. Although I think, and Megan, I think you agree with this, it's the doing the mind map that really matters more than the being able to read it or see it. And so I would encourage people to go through that process. Do you agree? It's the doing more than the
Yeah. The studying happens with the creation of the mind map for sure.
Yeah. I also think MindMeister had a weird week last week. They were having some technical difficulties, really big ones, and they managed to figure them out, which I appreciated. But there may have been a period for a few days last week when you may have had some difficulty downloading or working with it. That's all been resolved, and you should be good to go. You will also see some videos we've made about how to get into the mind maps, how to work with them. I don't want to take up time today. We will download the mind maps that we're using in these teaching sessions. They are part of your online course. Actually, you don't even need to be in bar maps. We're actually putting them in as optional assignments and adding the mind map as a download for everybody so that everyone can see that. But mind mapping is still the best way to take notes, don't you think?
Yes, I definitely believe that. So David had just asked in the chat box if there was a mind map available for the diversity jurisdiction discussion last week. So where specifically are they going to be able to find that on the course platform?
If you go into your course platform, diversity jurisdiction was in civil procedure. So go to the civil procedure unit in your course, go to the end of that, and you will find an optional lesson that says diversity jurisdiction explained. And then you should find, if you scroll down to the bottom, that there is a PDF of the mind map as a download that you can get.
Great. Wonderful. All right. Let's move into a few study strategy questions. A couple of these are pretty broad because we were getting the same kinds of questions from students this week, which is normal. These are the things we see this time every bar exam season. So first is, what should I do when I finish my substantive studies? And let me say, if that's not you, if you have not finished your substantive studies yet, do not panic. It's okay. This is just that there are people who are finishing. also don't compare yourself. You don't know when they started, what their circumstances look like. So please don't compare and don't panic if you're not done. But for people who are done, what do you think, Jackson? What should they be doing next?
Yeah. So there's some wisdom you just heard there from Megan. She just dropped some serious wisdom on you. When you get to the end of your substantive study, you will see that in the course platform, we've got all of the review. And the key here is to understand that the order of those review assignments is completely fungible. You can move it around any way that you want. And the question is, what's going to be most productive? So Megan and I believe that what you should do is work to your weaknesses. You should get to the topics that you feel least comfortable with. And you'll notice at the end of the substantive study that we have built in a worksheet in which we ask you to rank order the subjects. This is not for us to know, it's for you. And once you've got the rank order of the subjects, if you say that civil procedure is your least comfortable or least successful subject to date, then you want to jump down in the next set of assignments to civil procedure and start working through those assignments, doing essays if that's appropriate, doing some multiple choice and so on, and then go to your next weakest subject and next and next. So really the point is you don't have to follow the subject order in the review, but it is important to do the broad categories. That is, the first level of this review will be some additional MBE questions where that's appropriate, and some additional essays where that's appropriate. Then the next level for almost everyone will be doing the mixed question practice for the multi-state. We call that the OPE. What does that stand for?
Online practice exam?
I think that's it. Okay, online practice exam. See, I got you. See, Megan pointed out that I sandbagged her last week, so I'm going to try not to do that this week. And so there's the OPEs, and then there's the full-length practice exams, and we've got a brand new practice exam. And I, for the life of me, can't tell you what we called that, but there is a new exam, and it's in your materials online. It's also in your, if you've just got print books, it would be there, but it's in the online course and it's in the PDF. And you want to do those after you've done some review and practice, but then you'll do those full-length tests. Also, I will be in my daily email countdown giving you more specific instructions. I think probably this weekend on Saturday's email is typically the one where I start laying out all of the nuances of the MBE, and it's a lengthy email. Megan remembers that one. But that's the one that will direct you as far as what you want to be doing. But very few of you would be at the point of doing full-length multi-states right now, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. It's the 24 days to go to the bar email is the one that I love. That's the full, hey, here's all the MBE stuff that you're going to do. So when you're at that place, you'll be prepared and you'll know step by step what you need to do.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. Those directions will be there. So I think the point really I want to leave you with, without getting too detailed, is review is really your journey. Find the areas that you're weakest and do the work there, and then move to the next subject and just keep moving, but recognize that you want to work in your weak areas before your more comfortable ones.
Great. All right. This next question I think is a really good one. I'm glad that someone asked it. So they said, what's your advice on Exemplify's past question feature? So on the MBE, you could go past a question and come back to it. And it says, I know it's something, they said, I know it's something like you should do only the ones 100%, then do the ones 50%, then the ones you just pick your random letter. Yeah. I know what your advice is going to be. Go.
There was a time early on in my teaching when I would have said, sure, do all the easy ones, the next ones. But as we got more sophisticated and we got more data points, we began to realize that just didn't make much sense. And it didn't work particularly well because people then, they weren't sure enough of themselves and they said, I'm not positive, so I'll skip it. And so the number that they were skipping was just becoming massive, and they were just pushing everything back like a big snowplow that suddenly got so much snow it can't move it. Our approach to answering the questions is basically, I don't care what you're asking me. I don't care the subject or the topic or how difficult it is. I'm giving the question 90 seconds. I can use selective intuition and answer in 90 seconds. If I can't answer in 90 seconds, I'm marking an answer and I'm moving on and I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just in the order that you find it. I think people gamify this too much and they actually freak themselves out and they make it harder on themselves by trying to do that. So even though it's very nice that Exemplify has offered this technique or process, I would absolutely avoid it. What's your take?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think that MBE is actually an incredibly simple multiple choice test, in not meaning what's the subject, but meaning the design of it. It is literally, you get the same credit for every single question. So there's none of the stuff that we see on some other not really standardized, but some other tests that do things. If you answer things right, they start to give you harder questions, or if you answer them wrong, they give you easier. There's nothing like that. You're getting the same questions everyone else is, maybe in a different order, but same questions. And you do not have a penalty for getting it wrong, in terms of you never would leave it blank, right? So it's the same mark if you leave it blank as if you get the wrong answer. And because of that, in my mind, there is literally never a circumstance on the MBE where you should go past a question without marking something, because the most likely thing that will happen if you do that is you will never go back and answer it. Yep. And if you do that, you had a 1 in 4 shot. Even if you guess blindly, you had a 25% chance of getting it right. And now you have a 0% chance. So to my mind, don't play games with it. Don't try to be too clever by half. Okay. With the MBE, just answer the question and then move on. I think that people really get themselves in trouble when they try to treat it like it's more complicated than it is. Okay. So yeah, it's a really good question. I'm glad it was asked, if only so that we could really drill home to people. Do not skip questions on the MBE. You are hurting yourself. There's just no situation where that's going to benefit you. I've never seen that happen.
And a related question I got from a student today was, should I be timing myself as I'm doing MBEs? And the answer is, yeah, you should be answering a question in 90 seconds. Now, you don't time the time it takes you to review the answer explanation, but every question that you answer should be in 90 seconds, regardless of where you are in the course. It's just the habit that you want to start building.
Definitely. Which doesn't mean start and stop the timer for every question. Pick the number of questions you're doing and give yourself 90 seconds and start the clock for the total of that.
Yeah, I think that actually is better than the stop start thing, but
because of course on the test you're not going to be timing yourself by 90 seconds. It's not the chess clock.
You'll set some benchmarks and say, I want to be at question 25 at this time and question 50 at this time, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. All right, great. And then our last study strategy question is one we've been hearing a whole lot this week from all sorts of different people. It's time management. Lots of changes in circumstances, right? People's family situations, job situations, living situations, so much upheaval right now for so many people. And so how should someone who's dealing with, maybe I've been on the path like this and now suddenly my circumstances have changed, should they change how they're studying? Should they continue on like their schedule was before? What does that kind of look like in these last 30 or so days?
Yeah, there's a lot we could say about it. Let me start conceptually. Plato had what he called the allegory of the man in the cave. And it meant that the man was in a cave. He was chained to the cave, looking at the cave wall, and the sun was behind him. And all he could see were the shadows. And the shadows became his reality. And he was unaware that the whole world was going on behind him. If he just turned around, he would have seen that. Bar takers are a lot like Plato's man in the cave. They only see the shadows of the bar exam. It's all they can look at. It's all they can focus on. And then the world intrudes, as you said, Megan. Things happen. Certainly in a COVID world, we're seeing that all the time. And now the challenge is, as a bar taker, you are not shackled to the cave. You're not looking only at the shadows. You have the capacity to turn around and look at the world. And sometimes that change is going to free you up and give you more time to study for whatever reasons. Sometimes it will have less time to study. You'll be given a job opportunity or the opportunity to interview for a job or some work project that's really good. There could be good things that happen to you, and you've got to become more efficient with your study. But either way, really what's happening is you're learning to stay in balance. And my daily email messages really talk a lot about this balance. It's okay to do things other than study. You do not need to be in 15-hour-a-day study mode, regardless of where you are in the process. It's just not necessary. And so what we're looking for you to do is to stay pretty balanced about all of this. If you had a job and now you don't because of COVID, for example, then take those job hours and turn them into your study hours. Work 3 hours in the morning, take a lunch break, 3 hours at night or in the afternoon, go home physically or not literally, but maybe metaphorically, and then maybe do a couple of hours at night to review. In other words, you don't have to go crazy. Just remember that there is a world going on and there is enough time to get through this, and we still have plenty of time. I know it feels like the exam is right here. It is not. You still have a lot of time.
Yeah, wonderful. All right. Speaking of time, let's switch the remainder of our time over to discussing strict product liability. So this was the favorite on the poll, right, in the community group, and what people wanted to talk about. So let's go ahead and do some practice questions within that and take a closer look at the mind map and what the mind map might look like.
So we have been talking about the study questions that keep you awake. Today, as Megan said, we're going to look at strict product liability. We think that this is an interesting subject, and we're going to focus a little bit more heavily on the process of creating a mind map. When we got into this particular study, we got the question that this topic gives a lot of people some trouble. What we did and what we've been doing all along is to create mind maps. Now, today, I'm going to show you the mind map, and then I'm going to break it down and actually blow it up on the screen so that you can see it in larger perspective. But Megan pointed out that it was nice for people to see the overall context. And so I made just a quick video recording here, and I'm going to run that just so that you can see, as we're talking, structurally how we looked at this subject. This is strict products liability. It's in our second lecture in our course series. And what we did was to take the outline for strict product liability, and we broke it into some smaller pieces. We started at the very top, and you'll see as we jump up here that at the very top of the mind map, one of the things I like to do is to try and get the general rule or the outline. And so we're going to look at where it comes up and where it fits into the broader topic of negligence. And so you'll see that there are a couple of items there that we looked at, and we'll break those down a bit. Then after we did that, what we wanted to look at were some tests and rules that might apply. And you'll notice that when you look at this, there's a few words, but not a lot of words. This is one of the questions we got from people over the last few weeks, Megan, where people said, how many words do I put in a mind map? And the answer is, you don't have to put in a lot at all, do you?
No, but you also don't have to be as terse as I think some people thought. So if you look here where it's like elements, failure to warn, foreseeable uses, those are real quick and easy. But then there's a little bit more information as we continue on in the mind map and get a little bit deeper.
Yeah, exactly. As we go deeper, it actually gives us more of that sense of detail. But the primary items we want to have relatively short so that we can just see the structure. And so we get to defenses and recovery. And all of that really is in this context of strict product liability. But then there's also something called breach of warranty. And we look at that in the mind map. We're not going to talk about breach of warranties today, but it goes into that part of the lecture. So it's there as well. And again, to point out, what we're doing is to provide the actual mind map for everybody so that you can have a chance to use that. So that's the overview of the mind map. All right. Now, I want to break this mind map down into the smaller pieces and show you step by step what it looks like. And we'll go back to this as we need it. But we start with our core in the beginning. And the first thing you want to do is just identify your topic. And then, as I said, that was the upper right-hand corner where we had the question about what is liability for negligence? How does this fit in? And so substantively, what we're talking about when you've got a strict liability problem is that there has to be liability with regard to a particular item, a particular unit. You can't just have broad liability. It's got to be something specific. And there typically has to be either negligence in the design of that product or unit, or negligence in the instructions or warnings. So these are the key items that you're looking for in a strict product liability problem. Is it a particular unit? Is there negligence in design? And is there negligence in instructions or warnings? So what we've done is condense a lot of material just down to a few words so that you can see specifically what you need to know. And I think as you're studying, this makes it a lot simpler because it takes a lot of material and just breaks it to its essence. Do you agree, Megan?
Yeah, I hope this makes sense to people, that it's a great way to distill the information that might take up paragraphs in the outline into just little triggers to remind yourself. So we don't necessarily need to define what does negligent in warnings mean, but it's just a little note to remind yourself of that. That's one of the the ways that you could have this particular liability.
Yeah. And the way that I do that is that I take our outline and I look at what's in bold type and I photo read it. And then I come back and as I'm post viewing or doing my activation, I just go and create the mind map. That is how I activate. And I look at the material that's in bold, and that's often what goes in here. So that's what we did there. Now, once we've got that broad concept of what liability means within negligence, the next thing that we want to do is to look at the topic of strict product liability. So the subtopic and the thing that we are focusing on today. Now, here's the rule in green of strict product liability. A manufacturer or a supplier of a product that's defective and unreasonably dangerous can be held strictly liable when the product causes injury to the user or their property. Now, you notice that I've highlighted that in green. I've done that just to remind me visually that's important. And I could add some artwork. I'm not a very artsy guy, but I could add some kind of icon or information to help me understand it. But that rule is going to be the key that I want to have fixed in my brain, not memorized, but I want to know what's going on. And then I enhance it a little bit to the right there when I say that the risk has to be of physical harm to persons or tangible property. That's a way of explaining just a little bit more what the rule is, but that is our basic rule. And so to me, that's a really good way to help the non-conscious understand this is important. And then we've got some additional information that we're going to add. And of course, we can always add to our mind maps as we're going along, but this is the basic. All right, then the next thing that I think you want to know about are what are the elements for strict product liability. And this is the thing that people often want to do flashcards or memorize. We're not talking about that, but we are trying to get them identified here. So there are really three elements I think that you need to know about. The first is that it has to be marketed in a defective condition that's unreasonably dangerous. And again, I've identified to the right, that's a manufacturing or a design defect. You might or might not need that kind of detail, but that helps me know it. And then the second element is that there's a causation. It's been marketed in a bad condition, that's one. And then secondly, that causes the defendant's conduct and the harm suffered. And again, then I've got something of an exception to the right, which is that there's misuse. If the plaintiff misuses the product, that breaks the chain of causation. That's an important piece. And then finally, there's got to be a manufacturing and design defect, and we saw that earlier. So really only three elements to this topic. That's a little surprising, isn't it, that there aren't more elements to strict product liability?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's a pretty straightforward. I think people get freaked out about it because they, in general, get freaked out about negligence.
Yeah.
But I like strict product liability because I think it's one of the more straightforward pieces of liability.
All right. Next, the next thing in the outline says after the elements, there's got to be a failure to warn. And if you see in a fact pattern a failure to warn, just remember that it applies to dangers that were known or reasonably should have been known. So if you knew that it was a bad product and you didn't warn anybody, then you're on the hook. So that seems pretty straightforward to me. And then foreseeable uses. It's got to be that the product was actually being used the way it was intended. And the bar examiners love this, don't they? They always give you some product that somebody uses in a way that was never intended. And it's really designed to make you think, obviously, the product is defective, but it might be. But if you're misusing it, you can't get it. And so that's a real big one. And I would highlight that if you are studying this subject. Lots of questions.
And I would say, too, the key being that it has to be an unforeseeable misuse, because they love that as well, where it is a misuse, but it's also something that if they knew, a lot of people are using this product for something else. Great example would be like when teenagers started doing stuff with Tide Pods.
Yeah.
And so now, like I was at the grocery store yesterday and they have the Tide Pods are like, oh, you have to go up to the counter to get them, right? Because the point is, even though it's a misuse of the product, now it's foreseeable. It's a foreseeable misuse. And so the company and whoever's distributing, et cetera, needs to take steps to prevent that misuse.
Yes.
So
eating those Tide Pods, kids. I don't care how many views you get on TikTok. All right. Crazy. All right. Then we've got a category that's called unavoidably unsafe. Some things are just abnormally dangerous. And when that exists, the liability, regardless of how careful you are, is going to exist. And we're going to see a question that deals with that. The examiners love to ask these kinds of questions as well. They give you a product that's so outrageously unsafe, and then they try to tell you all the things that make it safe. Well, it doesn't matter. You're liable if it's an abnormally dangerous item. So you may want to start identifying some examples of that. That would be a good place to add to your mind map. And as you'll see, we're going to do a question that deals with that, and you could add that in here. And then, is there a reasonable design? And reasonable design is an important concept in this topic because what it means is there are two tests. One is called consumer contemplation. How does the consumer contemplate using this? And then the risk utility. Is it worth the risk versus the utility? And so is the design reasonable given that circumstance? And you can see my design that for some reason has shown up on the screen again. I have no idea what that means. But in any event, is there a reasonable design? All right, let's see. Next, there we go. Causation. Causation obviously is going to be very important in strict product liability. If there's an unforeseeable modification or an alteration, not an alternation, that constitutes a superseding cause of the injury. So that's something we've got to be watching. And then the plaintiff's misuse of the product removes liability. So if the plaintiff misuses the product, it could remove liability. And so causation then becomes that linchpin in which the problem can change. So you might have a dangerous product, but it was an unforeseeable modification that was made, and that constituted the real cause of the injury. So causation is a big part always in negligence, but in strict product liability as well. And sometimes I think people forget that, don't they? They think, oh, strict product liability, we don't have to show. That's not really true. You still have to find causation. Okay. Next, who could be liable? Manufacturers, suppliers, and lessors, and it doesn't apply to the performance of services. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because it is called strict product liability. It would have seemed obvious to me that it would never apply to services, but you'd be surprised at how often the bar examiners give you a question that has to do with the performance of services. And one of the answer choices is that the defendant is liable because of strict product liability. Doesn't make any sense. And then again, when we talk about the manufacturers, suppliers, and lessors, that chain of supply, we ask if they're engaged in the business of selling the product and if it's expected to reach the consumer without a substantial change in conditions. I'm selling it. It's the business that I'm in. I'm selling these Tide Pods. The business is a grocery store, right? They're engaged in the business of selling the product. And the product is expected to reach the consumer without a substantial change in conditions. So if that's the case, I might be liable. And I guess that's why Ralph's makes you go to the counter, right, Megan?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Who's protected by strict product liability? This is interesting because the obvious one is anybody that's likely to be hurt, but subsequent purchasers might be as well. And we're going to see a question with a subsequent purchaser. And so they are protected as well. Privity is not required unless there's a breach of warranty. We're not going to look at breach of warranty today, but I think that's an important piece as well. And then users, consumers, and bystanders, they're all protected. Now you might say, what's this about? Why is this important? Well, as you're going to see in a question that we're going to look at, you can get a question that's really just focused on this topic of who's protected, because that's one of the things the examiners like to focus on within this subject. All right. And then we've got some defenses. So we've gone through all of these basic concepts of strict product liability. I've just done in less than 10 minutes, everything that I think you have to know fundamentally, but there are some defenses as well. And so we've got three basic defenses. One is if the product defect was caused by a subsequent change made by a third party, that's a pretty good defense. If there's an unforeseeable modification, and that's the superseding cause of injury, that's another defense. But then we've got one exception. Contributory negligence is not a defense. And so we've carried that idea out a little bit further to explain why contributory negligence is not a defense. And the reason is it's if you have an unreasonable assumption of the risk by the plaintiff, that's different. But when the plaintiff's voluntary and unreasonable use of the product causes it to happen, if they knew about the defect and the danger it presents, well, we can't make contributory negligence a defense. So it's an interesting piece of this, and we're going to see again an example of this in just a minute. But you want to be aware, and I think the important point here is that if you see contributory negligence is presented to you as a defense as an answer choice, that is not a defense to strict product liability. In other words, the defendant can't come back and say, wait, the plaintiff was contributory negligent. Typically, that is not going to be a defense for them. All right, we're almost done with this part of the mind map. I just want to talk about recovery. If you had a question, and this is more likely to come up in an essay, I think, the recovery in strict product liability is limited to the kind of harm for which the activity was determined to be abnormally dangerous. So there are some limits to recovery. You can't make it broad and open-ended. This is not the sort of thing that expands. It's literally what's the harm that was done to you because the product was abnormally dangerous. So we've got that piece. All right. And then we've got breach of warranty. And again, it's all in the mind map, but there we go. All right, Megan, does that help explain the mind map a little better?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope people found that helpful to walk through what does it look like on a real specific topic.
And again, that took me about 15 minutes to create the mind map, literally just going through and highlighting from the books. If you're using our materials, our books, and you should be, the mind maps really come in together pretty easily. You can also find that in the torts bar maps and in the torts mind maps. All right, now we're going to do some questions. And we're going to invite those of you who are on the call with us today to participate.
All right. Oceanside Inc. manufactures and sells a popular 25 horsepower outboard motor called an Oceanside 25. In its literature, Oceanside states that the engine should not be operated at maximum throttle continuously for more than 30 minutes or damage may result. However, Oceanside is aware that in severe weather conditions, many users operate the motor at full throttle for longer periods to help control the boat in heavy seas. Andy bought an Oceanside 25 in the state of Vermont, a jurisdiction which retains the common law rules concerning contributory negligence. The motor was attached to his outboard motorboat and used for one season. During that season, Andy ran the engine at full throttle for 2 periods of 1 hour each during heavy weather. At the beginning of the next season, Andy sold the motor to his friend Bart. During the spring, Bart was caught in a severe thunderstorm of 2 hours duration, during which he ran the engine at full throttle. Later in June, while Bart was fishing and running the engine at slow speed, it caught fire, burning Bart. Bart has now brought suit against Oceanside Inc. on a strict liability theory for his injuries. In that lawsuit.
All right. So now we're going to see. Hopefully, as Megan was reading it to you, you thought, whoa, wait a minute. We got some contributory negligence. We've got a subsequent purchaser. We've got a foreseeable use. Where did we hear all those concepts?
Yeah, lots of things should stand out to you about this one.
All right. So let's see what we got here. In that lawsuit, answer choice A, Oceanside Inc. will prevail because both Andy and Bart misused the motor. So there's one concept. They were both users and they misused it. B, Oceanside will prevail because there is no privity between Bart and Oceanside. Remember, Bart is our subsequent purchaser. C, Bart will prevail if the motor was defective when Oceanside sold it to Andy. And D, Bart will prevail unless he was contributorily negligent.
So if people want to put in the chat box what they think the answer would be. So this is A is Oceanside will prevail because both Andy and Bart misused the motor. B is Oceanside will prevail because there's no privity between Bart and Oceanside. C is Bart will prevail if the motor was defective when Oceanside sold it to Andy. And D is Bart will prevail unless he was contributorily negligent.
Yeah. So using your selective intuition and what we've just told you from the mind map, this should actually be a pretty straightforward answer, I think.
So we're getting several C's and a couple D's.
Okay. All right.
So Bart prevailing is definitely the going answer. It's just a question of which one.
All right. Remember what we said about contributory negligence now, for those of you choosing D. All right. We ready to move on and see the explanation? All right. Let's do that. All right. Answer choice A said Oceanside would prevail, and that's wrong if anyone selected that. The reason it's incorrect is that misuse bars recovery in a strict liability action only when it's unforeseeable. Here, it was foreseeable, wasn't it? That we're told that the use of the product beyond the manufacturer's recommendations, but in a manner that was not unexpected, is not going to protect the plaintiff or not going to help the plaintiff. So it's a protection for the defendant here. The manufacturer is liable as the maker of a defective product, but if the misuse was foreseeable, it doesn't amount to a superseding cause of harm. So Oceanside, the defendant, is not going to prevail regardless of the misuse. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically they knew it. To take the facts of the question, they knew that Oceanside knew that people used it at full throttle for more than 30 minutes.
That's
So
right.
therefore, that's not going to be a defense for Oceanside.
Okay. How about answer B? Oceanside would prevail because there's no privity. Well, lack of privity between BART and the manufacturer is not a defense to strict liability. Remember, we said that strict product liability extends to subsequent purchasers and purchasers who are likely to be hurt by the product, even though they weren't purchasers of it. And you remember I said privity is an issue in a breach of warranty case only. So if you chose B, that's the reason that's an incorrect answer. So don't get suckered in on the lack of privity unless you've got a breach of warranty. All right, let's go to answer C. This is our correct answer. BART's going to prevail if the motor was defective when Oceanside sold it to Andy. And the reason is that in order to come and win on strict liability theory, the plaintiff has to show that the product was defective when it left the control of the manufacturer. So unless the plaintiff can show that the defective condition existed at that time, the plaintiff won't prevail. Now, defendant's liability will be cut off if the product defect was not created by the defendant, but by a subsequent change in the product by a third party. That didn't happen here. It was the use of it, but the engine itself was not changed by anyone. So it wasn't that Oceanside sold it to Jimmy's boat shop and Jimmy's boat shop changed the motor. That didn't happen. So given that, the plaintiff has to plead and prove that the product reached the user or consumer without an intervening change, and there was none in this fact pattern, and that causes our situation in which BART will prevail. A lot of people answered C. Is that right, Megan?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Good for you. Yay if you got C. All right, let's look at answer choice D. Some of you selected this, but that's not right. The answer choice said BART would prevail unless he was contributory negligent. Ordinary contributory negligence is never a defense to strict product liability. Simply failing to discover a defect in the product or failure to guard against the possibility of its existence is not even a defense. The only negligence of a plaintiff that provides a defense in an action for strict liability is when the plaintiff voluntarily and unreasonably uses the product and they know of the defect and the danger it presents. There's nothing in that fact pattern that tells us that. This is a form of contributory negligence, but it's really an unreasonable assumption of the risk because they know it's dangerous and they still do it. And the facts don't give us any information that BART had knowledge of Andy's misuse of the motor. So again, if you see contributory negligence, that's a warning sign to stay off of that. All right. I hope that's helpful, as always, and encourage you to check that out. We took more time to talk about the mind map today, but I thought it was important to help people see how to use the mind map and how to create that and make it work. I want to thank June for being with us, as always. Thank you. Megan, any last thoughts as we sign off today?
No, just keep at it, guys. For the February students, I know it can feel really overwhelming right now, but keep doing what you've been doing. Don't panic now, okay? Stay steady. That's what you just want to focus in this last month, is just staying steady. So we're all here for you. Whatever you need, please reach out anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everybody. We're glad you were with us. Stay healthy, stay safe, be productive, keep watching for those daily emails, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.